Bay West Church meets at 100 Emerson Road in Palm Bay at 11 a.m. on Sundays. We're glad you decided to check us out. God has a specific message of hope for your life and mine today. So listen up.
When we hear the word idolatry, we think of statues with weird horns with people bowing down in front of them. And while that's been seen in history, some of the most dangerous gods of today don't really have the traditional altar scene that we're used to. But some gods don't sit on a throne. American gods.
I was reading an article this last week there was a documentary that came out about Michael Jackson called Leaving Neverland, and it's kind of disturbing because it's so polarizing because Michael Jackson was widely known as the king of pop, one of the if not the most successful recording artist ever. He's dead, as we know, but his estate and his music is still earning millions and millions and millions of dollars every year. I heard the figure last week, and I wanted to say it was somewhere almost like $100 million in, was it 2016? And that was after he's been gone a while, still earning a lot of money, has a lot of fans. But the Leaving Neverland that came out was a rough documentary because it talked about some things in his past, and I don't want to get all into that. But what I do want to get into is what one of the people that made the documentary said that struck me. It said, the cult of Michael Jackson has some of the most rabid worshipers around. And he was saying that in response to the fact that he made the documentary that felt was true and honest, but he was being attacked from all sides, online, offline, all that, from people who were vehemently and energetically, they are bought in to this ideal that is Michael Jackson. And I think it even surpasses the person, because I don't even think it's about the person anymore. I think it's about this image that's been created that really, when you look at how people approach it, it's almost like they worship that. We've talked about the dangers of idolatry. God says in Exodus, look, idolatry is when you put something else in front of God. Okay, that's really what it is. You create an idol. When I worship something other than God, when he says, I will have no other gods before me, don't put anything in front of me. God is the supreme position. He's in his own category. He needs to be there. Everything we do needs to funnel and be founded off of him and what he tells us and how he tells us to live. And when we don't do that, we talked about the first week, there's some dangers involved with that. We talked about one, that we kind of lose God's protection. Sometimes we looked at the Israelites, and there's times that when we say, okay, when they start to worship other gods, God's like, okay, fine, I'll just let them take care of you. And I'm going to stop taking care of you like I did. I'm going to stop some of this stuff, this protection, and just let's see how that works out for you. And I think at times in all of our lives, we've probably found out that we probably worshiped another God. We put another God ahead of what God said, and we followed that, and it's ended us up with nothing. And a lot of the reasons that we are here is because at times in our life, we've chased something else, and we found out that it was nothing, and it held nothing. And then and we came back to God. But even in fun, when they chase to the God, we lose God's protection. We act on bad info. We make bad decisions because other gods don't tell us the truth. God is the truth. He shares the truth. He's always going to be faithful. He's always going to be truthful. We act on bad info, and usually what we end up when we act on bad info is we end up with bad outcomes in our lives. And that's the reason a lot of us are here. We followed something wrong. We followed something that wasn't God. We've ended up with bad info. God's allowed us to step up and to experience pain even before we met him. He said, okay, well, I'll let them deal with that, and that'll be part of their story when they do come to me. And some of us, that's where we've come to. We've come from that state to now we worship the Lord, and we're trying to put him first in everything that we do. And that's where we are. But Paul writes to the church in Ephesus in Ephesians chapter 5. And this is kind of a germination verse for this series. He says, you can be sure that using people, religion, or things just for what you can get out of them, the usual variations of idolatry, will get you nowhere and certainly nowhere near the kingdom of Christ and the kingdom of God. The thing you have to understand is he breaks it down to really three categories that we see, the variations of idolatry. It's people, it's religion, or it's things. There's really three categories: people, religion, or things. That you can, and most all of idolatry falls into the middle of that. And what you see with idolatry a lot of times, it's about getting what I want, what I want from God, what I'm trying to get out of that. It's people, religion, or things. There we go, three. That's the three things. First, we talk about people. We talked about people last week. And this is the thing we don't understand. A lot of times we talk about the 5 people that you can put, that can become idols in your life. It's the people you admire. It's the people you love. It's the people you owe, the people you hate, and also the person that you are. All of those things have the potential to take control in your life and put you at a place where you can either follow what God says, or I can kind of let what God says slide because whatever this relationship with Him so much, or with ourselves, because we can be the biggest idols in our own lives. Desire is a cruel master. I read that from a pastor and author named John Piper, and I believe it's absolutely true. We have a God of desire in our country. Whatever we feel like we need to be doing, that's probably what we're supposed to do. And the truth is, that's not true. That's a lie. Whatever you feel like is not the next step that you need to take. That's just a desire. That's just something from inside us. And we talked about how sin is made. It comes from desires within us. That desires that tell us to do the wrong thing. We don't shave that through God's word. We don't filter it through God's word. And it becomes an action. At that point, it's sin. And then it's destructive and it's dangerous in our lives. And we and everybody in here, you've seen it in your life. You've seen it in the life of a friend or a family member or someone close. You've seen what's happened when they allow sin to step in front of what God has said to do. And it's a hard, dangerous road. And some of us, when it happens to our family, when it happens to somebody that's close to us, we feel it. Because you don't just walk through life alone. When you have family and someone with you, and when they go through a tough situation, and you're experiencing some of the damage by osmosis, just by in close proximity to them, you feel it. And it's hard. But that's where it comes from. This dangerous situation where a person can become an idol. And it's it's actually when you put a person in, and here's the other thing, when you put a person in the priority place of God, this is something to think about. You put a strain on them in your relationship that relationship and they are not meant to handle. You put yourself in the priority, and you're the God, and it's going to all be about me. That's a strain on you can't handle. You put a spouse. I've had people, I live for my spouse. My spouse is everything. It's going to make your spouse happy. It's all about spouse. And, God says this, but spouse says that. I'm going to do what spouse says. I don't care what God says. That you put them in a place where they're not capable of dealing with the pressure that comes with that position, because there's only one person that can deal with that pressure, and that's God. He's the only one that's been made to, in such a way that He can capably, faithfully, and consistently handle being the number one priority in anything, in anyone's life. So that's what we have to look at. We have to realize you can't put people ahead. Today I want to talk about something that the middle one there, number 2. I want to talk about religion. Religion can become an idol. When we talk about what a religion is, there's a few definitions I've seen of it, and just so we know what we're talking about. Number 1 is the belief in or worship of a superhuman controlling power, especially a personal god or gods, because it does, sadly enough, religion should only revolve around God, but it doesn't. There's other ones. We have like a particular system of faith and worship. What you believe, what you act on. You may not can empirically define each moment, but you say, I'm going to make my judgment be on this. That's what you put your faith in at each moment. Of faith and worship. Also a pursuit or interest to which someone ascribes supreme importance. What you see in combination of all those things, it affects how you do your life. It's not just a moment in time. It's not a meeting once a week. It is how you live your life. And what you put the most importance on and what you believe has the highest priority and who or what you believe is in the most control. That's what you see wrapped around a religion. Now, we can all see how that can be an idol. We know there's lots of religions in our world. I I didn't look up how many there were, but there's a lot of them I know, and we see them all around here. They're some of the big ones, Hinduism, worships the supreme Brahman. Buddhists, they don't really worship a god per se. You may think they worship Buddha, but they really don't. Buddha's just a guy that achieved the state that they want to achieve. And so they kind of put him up at the front because the Buddha did it. We're going to do what Buddha did. That's kind of what happens. They consider him to be a guy that achieved that state they're shooting for. Talk about Islam, Muslim. They worship Allah. And a lot of times when you hear them talk, they're going to talk to you and they say that God is the same thing as Allah. But it's not. You look in our scriptures, you look in the scriptures, you see some real inconsistencies, from the Quran of who God says he is, even though there were some things that are very similar. Even some historical things that are similar, but they're not the same. It's just not the same. We talked about cults last week with people, right? That's a dangerous thing that becomes a religion. And they even reference Jesus and God. And you have to be careful with all people. When someone stands up to teach you about Jesus, and this is with me, and this is anybody that you listen to, any church, anybody you see on TV, just because somebody's on TV and they've got a big TV program and they have a pile and their worship center is packed and a lot of people, maybe they've got a best-selling book or something like that. I'm not trying to pick on anybody in particular, but I'm telling you, you got to run what they say through the Word of God, okay? You can't just accept it. Just because something's online doesn't mean it's all right, okay? We know this, right? Just because something's written down and it's on a piece of paper, you need to test it. When I teach you, you need to be in your word enough to know that if I make a mistake and I'm not there, maybe God's telling you to come help me out. Maybe I've got it wrong. I'm growing too. We have all, because we're all responsible for our own walk with Christ. God's not going to come back. If he comes to a teacher that taught you at some point, God's got his own responsibility that he's going to put on that guy, but it won't absolve you because you didn't read God's word and know what that dude said. And Michael, did you cut me off? Michael, dude, yeah. Let's stay off of that. Just stay off the mutes, okay? There we go. Stay off the mute. Headphones, stay off the mute. There we go. I know I'm back there at the same time. I'll tell you a story, okay? All right, I'm going to do it. I'm going to tell a story. This was one time I was running sound, right? I was leading worship. And I'm having a choir go. And this is how it is in the back. You guys don't know how awesome it is to have the people we have in our media booth and the job that's done back there. I'm just going to let you know. Because you are trying, this is how media works. You're doing one thing, you're doing nothing. And all of a sudden, in half a second, you have to do 6 things in the exact order or it all blows up. And that's every morning. And so you're sweating and you're ready, you're ready to go. And you're always trying to catch something before something happens because you don't know what you left on or left here. And I have a friend that we were running a choir. I was actually leading this choir. And I put the track to the choir on a video. It was like when we used VCRs back in the day. And I put it on this video, right? And so we're running the video with the track. And the guy who was running sound looked over and went, "Oh no, the VCR's running." And he didn't think at the moment, that's also the music that the choir's singing by. He's like, "I'm going to catch that before something happens wrong." And cuts it off, and all of a sudden the choir's up there with no music. I'm telling you, it's a tough job. It's a tough job. And Michael is doing an awesome job leading our guys back there and our team back there. At Christian, we have Ian that works with our Facebook Live every week like clockwork. Cheryl's back there doing an awesome job with our slides. So when you see our media team and you see our folks, make sure you tell them thank you, because that is a tough and stressful job. It's rewarding and it's needed, but it's awesome. But we talk about, back to religion, we talk about the cults that we talked about last week. And those are different. They sound like Jesus, but they're not. They say Jesus, or they may say God, but they don't mean the same thing. The worship of David Koresh, who used Jesus and God liberally in his language, led to 76 people to die, 76 branch Davidians, as they were called, to die in Waco, Texas in the early 90s. It can be damaging if you get it wrong. It's been that way throughout history, but religion isn't just that something that looks like religion as well. I remember I had a fraternity brother when I was in Sigma Chi in college. And I had a fraternity brother, and he was all up in the fraternity and everything, and it was kind of a club for me. It was an insecure time. I said, well, okay, I want to be a part of this club and be cool like everybody else. So I did. And, but I remember talking to this dude, Sean, and it was toward my senior year, and I'm listening to him, and it's just like a whole different ball game with him. It's like all real. It's the reason he lives. I was sitting there talking to him. You know, he's talking about all the values that it espouses and how he tries to have those values in his life, and it's so important, and he makes decisions based on all these things. And all of a sudden he said, you know, he told me his lifelong dream, his goal is to become a significant SIG, which is the highest award that you can get, you know, as a Sigma Chi. That you have to do a lot of community service and actions and be important, and you know, and you have to be nominated, and it means all your peers believe in what you've done, and people look at your life's work and they say your work is awesome, and they validate it, and they award you with this award, you know, and I all of a sudden it hit me as I'm talking to him. I'm like, Sigma Chi is your religion. That's your religion. That's what's running your life. So it's not always something over there that we don't understand. It might be something that's right here in front of us that is running our lives that we don't realize. You know, one of the most dangerous religious idols, one of the most dangerous ones that I think is we see Jesus talk about in Mark chapter 7. You know, if you have your Bibles, if you want to turn there real quick, Mark chapter 7. If you have your smartphones, you can do that as well. If you're looking off our Facebook page, you know, there's a link there that takes you to the Bible app with the verses there. We'll be dealing with verses 5 through 9 there in Mark chapter 7. You know, but let's take a look and jump in here. It says, starting in verse 5, so the Pharisees and the teachers of the law asked Jesus, "Why don't your disciples live according to the tradition of the elders instead of eating their food with defiled hands?" And let's get what they're saying is, hey, there's a tradition. You got to wash your hands a certain way before you eat food. And that's basically what they're saying. Hey, Jesus, I'm just telling you, why don't your guys do it the right way? And it's something that they had learned, a tradition that they had dealt with. And in verse 6, you know, Jesus replied this way. You might think that was reasonable, but here's what Jesus said. He replied, Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you hypocrites. As it is written, these people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They worship me in vain. Their teachings are merely human rules. And in verse 8, it says, you have let go of the commands of God and are holding on to human traditions. And he continued, you have a fine way of setting aside the commands of God in order to observe your own traditions. You know, the greatest religious idol is the idol that almost gets it right. Or that has a lot of things that are very similar, that sound good, that are socially acceptable, that are culturally known. That's some of the most dangerous places to find an idol. We have all kinds of religions that talk about Jesus. Some say he was a good guy all the way that he was the Son of God. You can be sincere and caring and kind, and they tell you to do good things, but if they don't worship Jesus that we know and God that we know, they're going to steer you wrong. And the sad part about it is sometimes you see this happen in people, in churches, in buildings, on Sunday mornings, where people say, hey, we're a church. We're X-denomination church. We're non-denomination church. We're community church. We're whatever, but we worship Jesus. But when you come in and you read your Bible and you listen to what they say to you, you might not say, wait a minute, that's not the Jesus that I know. That's not what God says over here. And you've got to be careful in those, because the worst religious idol is the one that almost gets it right, the one that looks like it's right. The Pharisees, that's where they were. You know, they were religious people. They were passionate about what they did. They were zealous about it. They tried hard. I mean, some people just, their commitment to Christ, they feel like, if they see the commitment to Christ and they judge the commitment to Christ by the emotional displays and by how much somebody puts into it. Well, I'm going to tell you, if you looked at the Pharisees, a lot of times you might think, boy, they really mean it. Their whole life is wrapped up around it. But you know what? You can be sincere, and you can be passionate, and you can be emotional, and you can be sincerely wrong. Because my passion and our sincerity has nothing to do with this thing called truth that's out here. And that's something we have to watch in our society. Because what we're slowly doing in society is we're taking truth and we're raising up things like the gods of desire and opinion and all of these things. And we're saying, you know what? These things trump that thing. Or these things change truth. Well, they don't. They don't. Now, we have the truth. We have the option, just like we've had all of our lives, to go against the truth and experience the pain of going against that. But the truth is the truth, and it always will be the truth, and there's nothing we can do to change what the truth is. And we can have success with almost the truth. We can have so we can do some good things with almost the truth. But the truth is, if you have almost the truth and not the truth, at the end of the day, you're going to be in full hell. You're not going to be in heaven with Jesus. That's not going to happen. Because Jesus is the predominant for us. He is our way to Christ. And if we don't understand the gospel and we haven't committed our lives to that, we're going to experience the same thing as somebody who was full out wrong as somebody who was almost right. You know, the reason that the worst cases of religion being an idol is the religion that's almost right, because so much of it sounds right. And you can let go of a few things. Well, that sounds really good. Okay, and I really like it. And that's awesome, and I like all the things about it. Well, you know, that's so I can let go of this because of that. Or I can maybe just shade over this because of this. But we can't do that. We've got to put Jesus Christ. Look at these verses. In verse 6 it says, "These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me." And in other words, they talk a good game, but they really don't mean it. They say all the right things. They use all the right terms. Outwardly, it sounds and it looks good. But in their hearts, they secretly don't practice it at all. You know, when it comes time to put their money where their mouth is, so to speak, in everyday life, they're hypocrites. And what that breeds is the next verse. He says, "They worship me in vain. Their teachings are merely human rules." In other words, if you take the teachings of God and you slice off parts of it, it becomes something that you made that God didn't say. It becomes, because what he said in the whole total is what he said, that's how we need to live. And it says, "You worship me in vain. Their teachings are merely human rules." You have let go of the commands of God and are holding on to human traditions. Their worship really didn't mean anything. It was worthless. It doesn't accomplish anything. Really, all that they are doing is teaching some meaningless human ritual, something that they saw somebody else do, maybe somebody else who was worshiping Jesus, and they were like, okay, they're doing that, okay. Okay, and that's okay. I'm not saying that's wrong. That person over there may be, but if you're just doing the things that Christians do, hoping that it'll make you a Christian, that's not how it works. It does not work that way. We can't just mimic what somebody else does and hope that it shows up in our lives. We give our lives to Jesus. Jesus changes our lives, and then the outside shows up as a byproduct of what God is already doing within us. That's how it's got to be, and it wasn't happening for the Pharisees. What happening for them? You know, for example, I mean, I've always said that it's hard to sing the songs on Sunday if you never put yourself in the place of the songs that you're singing. You know, the most meaningful and inspirational songs in your life are the ones you feel within your heart. They're the ones you feel deeply within your heart. The songs that mean the most, they're the ones you identify with. There's a song called "Great Is Thy Faithfulness." You know, it talks about the great faithfulness of God, how God has always been there. He's been there, but you know what? It's hard to sing "Great Is Thy Faithfulness" when you never put yourself at risk where God's faithfulness meant everything. When you never stepped out in obedience to God against your own better judgment, against what everybody else was saying, but God said, do it that way, I'm going to do it that way. And you knew that if He didn't show up, if God didn't show up, that you were going to fall and you were going to look bad in front of everybody and you were going to get hurt. It was going to be difficult, but God showed up. And when He was faithful, and then that you hear that song, it means something to you. It means something to you. So many people think that when we come to church, we're fueled for the rest of the week, and we are. in somewhat, but the biggest thing that happens is when we live our week for Jesus and we come here and express it outwardly to God, because He was faithful and He loved us, and we saw that over and over and over again in our lives. And what you have to get back to is, what is all of this for? What is all this for? You know, have you ever just sat down, pushed back from the table and thought, why am I doing this? Why am I show up here on Sundays? What am I really doing with this? You know, what's the reason that churches exist? And they have services and they meet at other times. Well, see, in our one-on-one with God discipleship groups, there's a key verse that we talk about. And if you're not a part of that, if you want to be, if you're experiencing trouble, you walk, or wanting to know how do I live day by day like Christ, because I believe your daily walk with Christ fuels everything else that you do for Jesus. You know, you need to get in touch with me, see me about that, and we'll get you hooked up with that. But the verse here, and I'm going to read it from the Amplified Version. It's really long in the Amplified Version, because the Amplified Version basically takes each word and puts down all the meanings that word could mean. And sometimes it gives you a really full picture. It's a bear to memorize, but it gives you a really good picture. In Philippians 3:10, says this: "For my determined purpose is that I may know Him," talking about Jesus, "that I may progressively become more deeply and intimately acquainted with Jesus, perceiving and recognizing and understanding the wonders of His person more strongly and more clearly, and that I may in that same way come to know the power outflowing from His resurrection, which He exerts over believers, so that I may so share in His sufferings as to be continually transformed in spirit into His likeness, even to His death in the hope." But really, what all that stuff, it gives you this massive picture of, this is what Paul said. This is Paul's like mission statement. I am here to know Jesus. That's what I came here for. It all boils down to this, that I may know Him. You see, it's not meant to be a religion. And you've probably heard this before. It's meant to be a relationship with Jesus. That's why we come. That's why we have Kids Zone. That's why we sing songs. That's why we have Bible studies. That's why we study and we teach. That's why we read each day. That's why all the things that you see us do, it's part of helping people and helping us to know Jesus. But here's the sad truth, and this is where the Pharisees were. Let me put it in modern day terms. You can love the church and not love Jesus. Do you know that? You can love the church and you can not love Jesus. The Pharisees, they liked the attention, they liked the position, they probably liked the social structure, and they were extremely comfortable with being there. They liked people who said, "Oh, teacher, oh, you're this," and they had achieved some status that somewhere in their society, it wasn't meeting for them, it was meeting a need for them. They loved church, but they didn't love Jesus. Church is where it stopped. And I'm going to tell you, that can work here too. People can enjoy coming here. They can enjoy coming to a church meeting, and they can love the status. They can love the sense of belonging. They can have a sense of importance. They can achieve a certain status within the congregation, and people can respect them, and maybe that's something they don't have outside the doors of the church, and they can love that. And you know what? All of that stuff is okay if you're doing it because I just want to know Jesus. I don't really care about that. I'm trying to know Jesus. That's why I came here. It's because I want to know Jesus intimately and personally and deeply. And I don't want to just know Jesus. I want to know the power of God in my life. I want to know what God can do, because I'm going to tell you something. If you love the church and you don't love Jesus, eventually it will kill you. It will wear you out. It will burn you out. Because at some point, trying to do church and to do this without a goal at the end, if the church is the goal for you and it's not Jesus, you're going to wind out. And it's going to come out, it's going to burn out in a few ways. One, it's going to drive you crazy. Two, you're going to try to be perfect like everybody, like all these people are trying to be all perfect and all this stuff, and you're going to get all judgmental, or you're going to get all bitter about it. And you're going to be looking around at everybody else, and you're going, okay, they're not like that, they're not like this, okay, it's a bunch of hypocrites, I'm going to leave. And And the problem is you got your eyes off Jesus, you got your eyes on everybody else, and you started judging what they're doing compared to you because you want to be validated by either somebody being worse than you or somebody you can look up to being perfect, and I want to be like that. That's not going to work. If you come to church, it better be about, because I want to keep my eyes on Jesus. I want to learn more about Jesus. I want to come with a group of people who are trying to be more like Jesus, and I want to become more like Jesus. I want to be continually transformed into who He is, into His likeness, not me. I don't need to be myself, that I am defining who I am. Let the person who created you define who you are. In your pursuit of Christ, you'll become exactly who He meant for you to be. But if your pursuit is church and church alone, at some point you're going to burn out. And I see it all the time. I've seen it all over the place. I've seen it throughout 20-something years of ministry. I've seen it through years before that. I see people who come for the social nature of it. They come for the moral checklist. They come for all these other, they come for the structure. They want the position. They want the power. They want this, that, or the other. And at the end of the day, eventually, I've seen it a million times, they just cycle right back out the door. And they go to another church because God's different over there. And I watch their life because I keep up with people. It's easier with Facebook. And you watch them. They go over there, and about 3 or 4 years later, they head out the door and they go somewhere else because we got to find a different God now. God's different over there. Something's wrong over here. It ain't like it was when I got here. Because you can't come for the church. You've got to come for Jesus. But here's the truth that's wonderful for you. When you love Jesus, you will love the church. When you love Jesus, you love the church. In Matthew 16:18, Jesus said that He says, I'll build the church. He told Peter, on this rock, on the confession that I am God, this is the one thing, I'm going to draw all kind of crazy rascals around me, and all they know is that I am God, and there's going to be bikers and weirdos and regular people and socially acceptable and not socially acceptable, and they're going to be friends, and they're coming around each other. They're going to look like a ragtag bunch of dipsticks. And you're going to look at them and go, how in the world are those people hanging out together? Well, they all love Jesus. That's about it. And you know what? There's going to be conflict in there because you know when you bring a bunch of people who are way different and all they care about is one thing, sometimes they're going to rub up next to each other and they ain't going to like each other, and it's all right. He said, that's why I left Matthew 18 and other things to take care of it and explain to you how to love each other. That's what goes on. That's what it is. But if you love Jesus, you put up with the rest because I want to get to Jesus, and I don't care if all y'all messed up. I'm messed up too. I'm just trying to get to Jesus. Okay? That's the attitude that we chase the Lord, and we can't put the religion in front of it. That's how God meant for it to be. You see, Jesus died for His bride. He called the church His bride. You know, it's not just an organization or a logo or a business, but people that exist to know Christ and help others know Him too. You know, I've told this story before. Jim Putman, who does a lot of work with discipleship, who I admire what God's doing through his life. He told this story one time. He said, I was decided I would follow Jesus, but I had a lot of problem with the church. Right? And I was talking to my dad, who was a pastor, and he knew this about me. And I said, and he turned it around to me. He said, okay, son, do you like me? Do you love me? He said, yeah. He said, okay. What if there was a dude over there that was like me and loved me and cared about me, but he hated your mama? He couldn't stand your mama, didn't want your mama to be around. He didn't want to be around your mama ever. How would you feel about that? He said, I'd be pretty freaked off. I don't think the guy could come to my house. I don't think I'd want him around. He said, well, you know what? The church is Jesus' bride. How do you think Jesus feels when you talk about him like that? But you're talking about somebody He died for, that He created, that He put on this earth, that He said, look, we're going to bring all these weirdos together and we're going to change the world. And it's been doing it for 2,000 years. And every time you think you got it stomped out, you look up and it's just moved over there and it's growing and it's bigger than it was. And you're like, oh man, I can't believe it. What happened to that thing? You can't get rid of it. Some people think cockroaches are going to outlast everybody. I think the church will myself, if you want to look at history. But see, this, you know where the passion comes from church? Where it should come? You know, some people think it comes from inspiring music, and it can inspire you, and you can listen to a message, you can identify with it. Some think it comes from a good preacher, and he's really funny. He's got a lot of awesome things to say. Some people think it comes from just being in a great life group and knowing people and stuff like that. And all those places are some of the ways that God injects it. But here's where it starts. It starts, true passion comes from a heart that will break if Jesus breaks, that will die if Jesus were to die, that lives as Jesus lives, that rises as Jesus rises. In other words, when he's the first thing, he becomes everything. And the passion and fuel for our lives shows up. And that's not a religion. That's because you are locked in to the creator of the universe who is fueling and supplying you. You know what Jesus never said? He never said if you sing the loudest, or if you do the most, or if you have the most energy, or if you show the most emotions, or you can dance like David, or you can whatever task you put before that. Said, look, if you love me, you follow me, and I will supply the rest. That's how it is. Passion comes from a pursuit of Jesus. It's not attending church. Do you really think that the disciples died to show up at a meeting for an hour a week? Do you think people left their careers and their goals and their stuff and their homes and ultimately gave their lives to show up for an hour a week? To sing 3 or 4 songs and go home? No. They showed up to know Jesus. And they stayed because they tasted the power of God in their lives, who changed them from the inside out, who took the mess that they had and either changed them or changed the situation. And they saw it because only Jesus could do it. And you know what? I can't get away from that. I know who holds my future. I know who created me. I know who is the God who runs all things. And I'm going to stay there, and you can't beat me off with a stick, man. Because I'm trying to get to Jesus. I'm trying to get to Jesus. The biggest problem with religion as your idol is that it stops right here. And that's not good enough for me to give my life to. There's an eternity that goes past here, that will last forever. And there's a God who's greater than any man-made system or situation. You can't build a temple or a building or have a big enough worship service to do him justice, but I'm darn sure going to try the rest of my life. And I will go to be with him because that's the goal, that I may know him. And I'm going to tell you, when you worship the religion and not the Savior, you're always going to fall short. You're always going to wonder why. How does this not work? And why is it not right? I don't see it. It's just not what I want it to be. I know you said do that, God, but if I do that, that's crazy. I'm going to do this over here because I got better sense than me about that to do what you said. That's antiquated. It's back there. I don't know whatever reason you want to put before it, but if you're not putting Jesus first and Jesus not on the other side of it and you're running through this place to get to Jesus, it's going to be a sad situation, and you may have religion as your idol. Don't fall into the trappings of church. Don't fall into the trappings of a system or a meeting. Don't fall into that. It's just a means to an end, and Jesus is the end.
Thanks for being a part of Bay West today. Bay West Church meets at 100 Emerson Road in Palm Bay at 11 a.m. on Sundays. Please feel free to check us out at baywestchurch.org, or you can follow us on Facebook at Bay West Church.